Now then, guys, welcome back to the Cycle Sunday podcast. Mr. Bowker, you are in your flat and you've had a very, very busy week.
It's been chaotic. I think the two of us have probably not spent the last 24 hours doing much sleeping.
Oh, yeah, well, yes, because I was up at 1 o'clock this morning delivering training to Singapore, and you've been driving bikes up and down the M6.
Yes.
So I think it's about time. You've got a red wine on the go. I'm going to, hold on.
That is the sound of Peter on day 10 of Beer Advent Calendar. What's it called today, Peter?
This was actually from yesterday, because yesterday was our wedding anniversary, so we were drinking champagne, sweetie. This is a proper job. St. Austell Brewery, proper job. Powerfully hopped IPA, one of my favourites, actually, 5.5%.
Very good.
So
sorry, as this has come out of the Advent box?
Yeah.
Okay, so you've got number 9 and 10 to do tonight?
No, yes, because I haven't actually opened number 10 yet. It's still in the window because I've been busy today.
Yes. And can I just say also, congratulations. That is, I'm hoping that everybody has seen it on Instagram, but that is 21 years to Peter
of punching above my weight.
Of punching well above your weight, frankly.
I know, it's amazing. I don't know how I've done it.
Yeah, because just from a pure shallow perspective of the fact that your wife is incredibly beautiful, punching above your weight, but add to that, absolutely lovely as well, punching above your weight.
I know. I'm very lucky. Yeah, no, I got loads. Actually, this isn't about Petrol Ped social media, but I did put a post on Insta and Facebook, and I've been overwhelmed by the response. It's been very, very lovely. So
yeah,
but yeah. So cheers, my friend.
Yes.
Let's talk about this evening's video.
Indeed. Let's move on to that.
Following normal form, you haven't seen yet. You just have to take my word for it that what's in it and it's okay. So if you have come over from this evening's episode of Cycle Sunday, welcome. If not, make sure you check out this evening's episode of Cycle Sunday, because I get a new bike. And new bike day is always a good day.
It's the best day, isn't it?
New bike day is actually it's nearly as good as new car day.
Well, depending on the car, actually it could be better.
Yeah, and I've had a new car day today, although we can't talk about that because I won't have revealed what the car is until tomorrow. So keep it secret, Mr. Bowker, because you know.
I will.
Yes. So yes, tonight's new bike day. So
new bike day.
A little bit of backstory, I guess, because everyone listening is probably thinking, hold on a minute. You've already had 2 new bikes on this podcast series. What on earth's going on? Are you turning into the shmee of the bike world? Well, the Cycle Sunday journey began speccing and building the Ultra XR4. As a product of that being delayed, I've got a loaner, long-term loaner, Arcadex, which I absolutely love.
Yeah.
But the funny thing is that during the more time you spend talking to the guy at the other end of this podcast, you end up getting enthused by amazing bikes. And when I was up in Scotland in January doing the initial filming, the bikes that really kind of made, apart from the beautiful road bikes that they had, both Trek and Bianchis, but the big full suspension mountain bikes and full suspension e-bikes, they just look ace.
Yeah.
And I thought, I'd really love one of those one day. And then we got Tracy wanted to get an e-bike, so we bought Tracy's e-bike, and I had a little go on that in Edinburgh, and then obviously when she got it delivered here, I've had a little ride on it, and it was just, it's an amazing sensation riding an e-bike.
Yes.
So we got talking and hypothetically talked about what kind of e-bike I might get, it basically, Paul sold me a really expensive bike.
I didn't really sell it to you. I think it was very much Pete did just do the buying of it, in if we're honest. And the other thing is, I've just been thinking about what you've just said there about the sort of shmee of the bike world. And
Yeah,
and I think we should get some IP on this, some intellectual property for the
yeah.
Scheichel selection or the Scheichel collection.
Yes,
Yes.
very good. Yes, although it's very close to shite, which probably isn't a good thing.
No. Okay. Let's let's not do that then.
So yeah,
So
you're a good salesman.
what did you buy, Peter?
Well, we have talked about it on the podcast
Yes.
already, um, and so I bought a Trek Rail,
Yep.
9.5.
Yes.
So that's the full suspension enduro style e-bike,
Yep.
mountain bike. We'll talk about the details maybe a bit, but it's got uh, front and rear suspension with a large amount of travel,
Yes.
160 mil up front, 120 mil at the back.
One,
I think
one,
if
one,
I'm right.
150 out back. So what one's
Ooh.
160 front, 150 back. And it might be worth,
I'll have that.
it might be worth actually very, very quickly just running through the electric mountain bike range with just to set some context. So,
Okay.
so really, really quickly. So Tracy has a Powerfly, and a
Yes.
Powerfly is the hardtail, so no rear suspension mountain bike. You then have a new bike which is called the Powerfly FS, which is Powerfly full suspension. Lovely, lovely bike. And that has 120 mil up front and around 100 on the rear. So you've got to consider that as somebody who's probably doing 90% of what you are doing with your bike, you could do on a Powerfly FS.
That would probably be fine for me, to be honest, because
Yeah.
I'm not very good on it.
Well, no, it doesn't matter. That doesn't matter. But in terms of what the type of riding that you're doing mainly, which is sort of the South Downs way, where it's mainly off road rather than doing sort of big tabletop jumps and rocks and routes and that sort of stuff. The for somebody who's wanting wanting the full suspension just to literally take the sting out the back end of the bike, then the Powerfly FS would do that job properly. The reason why you went for a rail, which is what we would classify as I am spending most of my time at places like Bike Park Wales, up at the Seven Staines location. So bike park resorts or somewhere where you are going to start getting a little bit gnarly over bigger rocks, roots and debris, then that is, big days in the Peak District, big days in the Lake District, all of that kind of stuff. That's where rail starts to come in. It's a bit more burly. It's got more suspension travel, but everything, the frame, the suspension linkages, everything is designed to take more abuse. And the reason why Peter went, why when we discussed full suspension bikes and an e-bike for Peter, was that the plan moving forward was that I'm going to introduce Peter. We're going to do more rides together. I'm going to introduce Peter to do in slightly more technical terrain. And we wanted a bike that wouldn't just be able to do what he can do brilliantly today, but also have the ability to be able to do that riding as well. So that's why we chose the rail.
Because I've never been to a bike park.
No. So that's going to
And I
be
need to
good
learn
fun.
how to do jumps.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah. So okay. So I then make the decision to buy a rail, and as we explained on the video, I kind of bought the entry level carbon framed rail.
Yeah.
So it's the best frame in the range with the best motor,
Yeah.
but it's got the entry level component set and entry level wheels.
Yeah.
And the idea behind that was, well, actually twofold. If I bought the next one up, it was much, much more expensive and I couldn't afford it. But also, it gives me the opportunity to do some upgrades on the bike as and when the desire or the need arrives.
Yeah.
And this is then the interesting part. I bought the bike in the middle of the summer.
Yes.
And I because of stock, Paul said, "Look, I've got one in stock.
Yeah.
Do you want to put your name against it?" And I said yes. And then I bought the bike, paid for it, and then didn't see it for like 3 months because I wasn't planning to come up to Edinburgh.
Yeah.
So that gave Paul lots of time to be a scheming git and sell me more stuff.
That's slightly
And
unfair.
no, it's absolutely
Oh,
accurate.
okay.
And so we'd have conversations about him and Rosie going out on his rail and how cool it was, and he'd get me all excited about how amazing this bike's going to be, and what the cool things he's doing to his bike. And being me, I'm like, damn, that sounds good. Oh, Matt, I need one of those. Oh no. So we ended up deciding that, because the original plan was I was going to pick up the bike, bring it
Yeah,
home, ride it for 3 months or
yeah,
so, then change some
yeah.
bits. And to be fair, the first thing I would have changed would have been the wheels anyway.
Sure.
So that was just a matter of time. So when I asked whether or not it could run a tubeless setup, and yes, it could, but it wouldn't be an optimal tubeless
Hmm.
setup. And then the wheels were the biggest compromise on the bike. And Paul just happened to mention that there was a set of nice carbon Bontrager wheels that would go really nicely, and they were tubeless ready, and they could run Michelin tubeless tires. I bought them.
It
And
it was a
then
very complex process, wasn't it, Peter?
yeah, it was really
Yeah,
difficult. And then about literally like 10 minutes later, he sent me another WhatsApp going, and by the way, there's an electronic shifting upgrade that will turn your bike electronic shifting. And I'm like, oh no, because I do like me electronic shifting. So hence the upgrades. And I think some people will have watched tonight's video and gone, hold on a minute, you bought this bike, which wasn't cheap.
yeah,
And then before you've even sat on it, you've spent another whatever,
yes,
making it more expensive still. So it wasn't the normal route to go down. But what we thought we'd do in this in this podcast, is just talk about a couple of
mm,
things. The first thing I want to do is I want to talk through with Paul about my first. I've done 3 rides on the bike now. I think I've done about 65 miles on the
wow,
bike.
brilliant.
And I've already noticed some really, really interesting things about riding an e-bike. So we're going to first off talk about that, because I think there are, and even I've had some friends of mine on Facebook, some people I'm linked with on Strava, have been less than complimentary about me buying an e-bike,
Yeah,
suggesting something along the lines of I'm a big girl's blouse, and and why am I buying an e-bike? It's cheating and all that.
mm,
I want to bust that. Having now done 60 odd miles all off road on an e-bike, there's a technique to riding an e-bike we want to talk about, and then what we thought we'd do is just have a chat about just generally modifying bikes in general, because I found that process of deciding what to modify and so on a really interesting
yeah.
one. Sound a good
That's
plan?
it. That sounds like an amazing plan. And you just lead away, and I will answer any questions that you have.
So I'm going to start with just talking through, because in the video tonight I didn't um talked a little bit about what the bike's like to ride, but it was quite short at the end, sort of 3 or 4 minutes worth. So the first things first is I've done a couple of routes. There's a really nice route from my house that goes up over a kind of little ridge called Kingley Vale. You can drop down, get onto the South Downs Way, ride along the South Downs Way for, I don't know, about 10 miles, and come back in a big loop. And it's about 25 miles, something like that. And on my normal full suspension mountain bike, or I've done it on the Arcadex as well, it's kind of 3 hours pretty much. It's quite a gnarly road. It's pretty
Yeah.
hilly. I did it on the e-bike in 2 hours.
Okay. So it was a third of a time to do 25 miles.
Yeah,
Okay. And
yeah.
did it feel as though you
Um,
hadn't used the bike at all at the end? It just
I
did it for
I
you.
got back. I got back from that ride and I was
Yeah.
destroyed.
Yeah.
I was absolutely
Yeah.
destroyed. And the first big climb I did, all you do, I mean, I guess it depends on your mental approach to riding a bike. Okay, so I think if you want to buy an e-bike and have it help you as much as
Hmm.
possible and make your ride as easy as you want it to be, you knock yourself out and put it in the highest assistance mode, and don't put the effort in, and the bike's going to help you out
Mm.
quite a lot. But That's not
Mm.
me on a bike. When I go out on my bike, I want to put the effort in. I want to break sweat. I want to get myself out of breath. I want to get my heart rate up to 160 beats a minute, and I want to do the work. So I went up this climb in eco mode, the lowest assistance
Yeah.
mode. But you have to work
Yeah.
hard. I mean, the bike weighs 20 kilos for a start, so you've got to overcome that
Yeah.
anyway. And it's hard work. And I got to the top of the climb much quicker than I would ever do it on a non-assisted
Yeah.
bike. But I was just as
Yes.
knackered. I was just as out of
Yeah.
breath. I was just as
Yeah.
sweaty. And all I did was I just went longer and harder in less
Yes.
time. The
The
end.
end. Yeah. And seriously, anybody in the comments who says e-bikes are still cheating, e-bikes are still defeating the object, I suggest you go and ride it. Don't write the comment, right? Because it is
No.
not true. Go and ride one and find out that if you do not pedal an e-bike, it doesn't move. Right?
Yeah, I know. And the bit that did it for me was this particular ride. It goes up onto the South Downs Way, and you ride along a ridge
Yeah.
line from kind of South Harting over to Cocking. If anybody listening is local, because I know quite a few people are local to me here in West
Yeah.
Sussex, and it is the most beautiful bit of the South Downs Way. It's a stunning view. You can see for miles, and it's very peaceful, and I love riding along there. But to go there on a non-assisted
Yeah.
bike is actually quite a trek. So unless you've got 3 hours or so to go there, I bet I don't go there that
Yeah.
often, because often when I go out at the weekend, I maybe only have a couple of
Yes.
hours, and therefore I wouldn't get to ride it that often on even on the Arcadex, which covers the ground really
Yeah.
quickly. On an e-bike, suddenly you think, well, actually, I can get to my favorite bit of track, and I can ride it, and I can. In fact, on the way home, I even added an extra climb and an extra loop on because I had some extra
Yes.
time. So I just covered more ground, saw more of the beautiful countryside in the same amount of time as I would have gone out anyway. But I was still as fatigued afterwards, and my legs still had that lovely clean ache the
Yeah.
next day, and I just went further. And that for me, I got back and went, oh wow, I get
Yeah.
e-bikes in a
Yeah.
big way.
And there's another aspect to it as well, which is just getting you out on the bike in the first place. So let's look at today as your timeline. You were up, you went to bed last night
Yeah,
at 9 o'clock. Okay.
yeah,
You got 3 hours sleep. You were
yeah,
prepped, ready to deliver telecoms training at 1 a.m. till
yeah.
9 a.m. Do you say? Or yeah.
Fine.
So
Yeah,
so from 1 till 9. You then obviously will have just had a little bit of relaxing with a breakfast and what have you, but then you're straight into the rest of the emails and the rest of the day that you had going.
yeah,
You then went to Hendy to go and pick up your new
yeah.
car.
Bournemouth,
Yeah,
pick up my
so
car.
yeah,
Squirrel.
Secret Squirrel. We then had and you were working whilst at Hendy because you needed to do your bit to camera. You're working
Yeah,
whilst in the car because you were talking to me about the podcast tonight. You
yeah,
then get home after
yeah,
having to go to the shops because you're still a human being, even though a worldwide superstar. You're still a human being and still have to go to the shops. You get home, and at this moment in time, you're doing a podcast. But
yeah,
with that level of fatigue in you, would you ever consider, if you had an hour now to just go and get some fresh air, would you ever consider
yeah.
jumping on just your mountain bike and going for a ride?
No, and actually, I'd take it one further than that. Tomorrow
Yeah,
morning, I would actually quite fancy going out on the e-bike tomorrow morning, but I'd have to think twice about going
yeah.
out on my normal bike.
Because when you are tired, and you've also the other thing is it's not sort of woe is Peter here. You've also sort of had a bit of a cold over the last couple of days as well. So
Oh, I like you. You're making me
yeah,
feel
yeah,
all, yeah. But
yeah,
that's
yeah,
sympathy, man.
absolutely. So this is this is just this is normal life we're dealing with now. We're not dealing with, and I think this is the thing that annoys me about the comments of it's cheating and defeating the object about e-bikes, because the people who are writing that potentially have got a ton of time. They're really well trained. They're really well fit, and they're not thinking about the general populace, which is folk who have got normal day jobs, working every hour that God sends. We've got family, we've got kids, we've got responsibilities, we've got tiredness, we've got fatigue, we've got day to day living, we've got, I've got a cold at the moment, I'm not feeling great, I'm feeling a bit tired. I've not ridden a bike, I've not exercised for a number of years. I'd love to get out on a bike. I'd love to get some fresh air. I'd love to get that tingly sensation of feeling good after having some exercise. But can I just have something
Mm.
that just takes the rubbish away? It takes the pain away. It takes the reason away why I'm not going to go out and exercise. And that is what an e-bike
Yeah.
does.
Yeah, and I couldn't agree more. And by the way, listeners, I will tell you about Paul's rubbish week because he's had a pretty bad week as well. But the other thing is, it the thing that I like, and I've not thought of it this way until this very moment. So bear with me if I can
Yeah.
put it into words. Is on an e-bike, the amount of effort you put in is up to you.
Yes.
And what I mean by that is if I go out on a normal mountain bike on a route and I hit a big climb, there's nobody that's going to get me to the top of that climb
Yeah.
apart from me. I've got nowhere to go. I've once I get in my granny gear, that's it. On an e-bike, when I get to the bottom of a big climb, I can make a conscious decision to say, how much effort do I want to put in, or how much energy do I have left? If I want to work hard and put the effort in, I'll stay in
Yeah.
eco. If I'm a bit tired or I want to go longer today, I'll just put it in tour. Or if I'm really tired, or if that's a really nasty, big, gnarly, horrible climb, I'll stick it in turbo. So I can make these decisions
Yeah.
as I go around. And what that does is, and I didn't really get it until I've ridden a bike out. And I normally in my head before I go on a ride, unless I'm using round trip routing or something, I'll have in my head the ride I want to do. On an e-bike, what I found when I was doing the ride the other day is I think, oh, actually, I've got a bit more time. I'm going to go this way. I know there's a really horrible hill that way,
Yeah.
but I don't care because I'm just going to go and enjoy it. And you turn, rather than going straight home, you turn left or
Yes.
right a bit more, and you go off and add an extra climb on, which is
Yeah.
still effort. So you end up actually probably doing more work, and I
Yes.
love that. I really, really love that. So that's the first bit I really wanted to get across, and because we've talked about it in podcasts, but I hadn't talked about it from the perspective of being there and
Yeah.
experiencing it. You had, because you've got an e-bike. I hadn't, and for me, it's the coolest thing about that bike. I absolutely adore that bike, and I've only ridden
Brilliant.
it 3 times. Now then, the next bit I want to talk about, because this is the bit, this is the engineer in me, the analytical, if you like, the car reviewer head on a bike
Yeah.
ride, is when you're riding the bike, and the reason I wanted to talk about this is I'll try and do my bit to explain what I mean, and then because I've prepped you on this one, what I want to talk about, and maybe you'll be able to
Yeah.
explain it a little bit. But the CX motor on the bike has, I'm going to describe it as almost like a power band. It has a zone that it works in where it gives you the most assistance, and it's to do with the cadence
Yeah.
and the gear that you're in. And it actually it links to what we've just been talking about. If you're riding the bike and you're not in that kind of power band, it doesn't actually help you that much. It's far more difficult to ride. You need to be able to judge the gear, and I think it's especially obvious in the higher assistance modes like
Yeah.
Tour and Turbo. If you get in the right power band in Turbo, you really feel the bike pulling you up the hill. But the really weird thing is, normally when you accelerate on a bike, you keep on putting effort in and go faster and
Yeah.
faster and faster and faster. But actually, with an e-bike, especially when you're tired, what you need to do is find that power band and just stay in it. Stay at that speed,
Yeah.
stay at that cadence, and that's where you get the most
Yeah.
assistance. Am I right? And please explain why, because
Well,
I know you can.
you are right, but I can only explain from a from a experience in flipping heck. This isn't wine, by the way. That is just physically trying to get a word out.
He's just poured himself like half a bottle of wine
Yeah.
into his glass. By the way, I'm just saying.
So it's just experiencing it. Um, you're right. Where people, yeah, where
So it's you not did you not notice it literally within about 20 minutes of being on the bike? You're like, oh wow, this is there's a real
definitely, yeah,
technique to this.
that's the key thing. So let's unpack it a little bit. So we're just purely referring to Bosch motors here because that's so it's on Trek power on all Trek commuter bikes, hybrid bikes, and mountain bikes. They just have the Bosch system on it, and the vast majority
Yeah,
uses the Performance CX motor. So that is
yeah.
250 watts of continuous power plus 85 newton meters of torque. Now, again, for those, it's a
That's a
lot.
lot,
So,
man.
so again, torque is basically the grunt that assists you up the hill. It gets 95 kilos in my
Right.
perspective, and the bike up a really steep hill really fast. The thing that you've got to
Yeah,
bear in mind, though, and this is where so many people who buy e-bikes go wrong, is number one is they just want to travel everywhere at 25 kilometers an hour. And that, for me, is not doing what an e-bike should do. Because if you buy an e-bike and just stick it in a high gear, so one of the smaller sprockets, stick it in turbo and just get that thing to its maximum top speed and just try and keep it there. Number one, you're putting massive load and massive strain on the motor. You're draining your battery really quickly. But also imagine all of that power and torque. So don't forget, it's not just the motor, but it's also the human aspect of the powertrain that's going through those pedals as well.
yeah,
And you imagine the amount of strain that is on those small cogs at the back being pulled by the chain with that amount of power and torque going through it. You're going to go through
yeah,
chains and cassettes really quickly. So what you always have to
yeah,
remember on an e-bike, and this again is goes back to, it is not cheating or defeating the object. You have to ride it like a normal bike. It is a normal bicycle, but with another 250 power, 250 watts of assistance to it. So, as Pete quite rightly
yeah.
says, the way I ride my e-bike, there you go. I'm being very descriptive here. If you're watching on YouTube, I'm actually holding my grips.
He's
I'm
holding some
holding my
handlebars.
grips.
He's actually holding invisible handlebars.
I was about to actually, with my thumb, start going up the modes on my on my controller as well. So
Yeah,
when you ride, I'm going to continue that because I'm loving it. When you when you're riding your e-bike, you ride it. I ride mine in eco all the time, without fail, until I start getting into the lower gears, so probably gear 1, 2, or 3. That wraps a huge amount of chain around a lot of teeth on the rear cassette. So that means that the power and torque on those lower gears are going to handle that power and torque better. And you're also apportioning the wear on the chain all the way across the cassette rather than just wearing away gears, 12, 11, 10, and 9, for example, in turbo mode. So I ride my
yeah,
e-bike at a speed and a load like I would a non-e-bike. Then only when I get into
yeah,
those upper half and third of the rear cassette, if I'm starting to feel it in my legs and I'm starting to feel I'm moving from an aerobic to an anaerobic zone, and this is back to what Pete was talking about a second ago. When you're on a non-e-bike, If you can't turn those pedals, you're getting off the bike. If you can turn those pedals, but you feel as though your quads are about to explode out of your legs, don't forget that's not really for fitness, because you're out of your aerobic zone at that moment in time, which is your heart and lungs zone. You're into your anaerobic zone, which is great for building muscle mass, but it's not great for just general fitness. And what an e-bike does is, with those different modes, it keeps your body in an aerobic zone more of the time, which is why we don't feel as though we're going to blow up at any moment, which means that we can ride for longer. And also, you're in your fat burning zone, which is sort of 65 to 75, 80% of your aerobic zone most of the time. So, arguably, you
Yeah.
could even say, and Rosie, who is a biologist who would do a better job than me, I know we spoke about this last week, but arguably you could get fitter on an e-bike rather than it actually cheating and defeating the object. But then what happens is that when you get into those lower gears, you can start upping those modes. So let's talk about the modes for a second. On the Bosch system, you've got 5 if you include off, because you can
Yeah.
turn the motor onto the controller into the off position. So you keep the system live and on all the time, but you select off. So if you're bumbling around down a cycle path or cycle track, you're going quite fast enough, thank you very much, because there's a lot of dog walkers and people walking with the kids and what have you. So you're not going particularly quick anyway. You can just literally ride the bike in the off position. You're not consuming any battery power at all. When you then start getting into a bit of headwind or a bit of a hill, and you go, actually, I could do with a little bit more assistance. Now you can flick it into eco mode. Now Bosch will say, "Oh, this gives you an X percentage and what have you." I'm just going to work on simplistic terms. So for me, that gives you about sort of 40% of the available power and torque of the motor. And then when you then start
Yep.
going up the gears, it then still gives you that same level of power and torque, about 40%, but you change gear as it starts getting steeper. When you get into those lower gears, so the big cogs on the back, and you're still feeling the load in your legs, you can up it to tour mode, which will give you around 60% of the available power and torque. So that means that you can
Yep.
carry on at the speed that you're doing with the same load in your legs, but the bike doesn't slow down. Then we're going to skip EMTB mode for a moment, because that's a dynamic mode. Turbo is effectively Captain Kirk going down to Scotty saying, "Give me all it's got." And that is brilliant.
Yeah.
And I did a video that's on our YouTube channel, which is entitled "Can e-bikes and non-e-bikes coexist together?" And there was one section which was a really long, draggy hill that I was actually in eco mode, but at the end there was about a 12-foot really steep section to get up onto the fire trail, and it was really steep. So just for
Mm.
that small section, it was about a kilometre climb, but for that short 15-foot section, I just put it into turbo mode, and that just gave me a shove up over the top of that crest. And I dropped it back down into
Yeah.
eco mode again. So that's the great thing about an e-bike. And back to what you said earlier, Peter, was the fact that you can choose the mode dependent on what you are feeling and what terrain you are rocking on that particular day. But every ride is always going to feel good. But you're absolutely right. You have to be in this power band, and you can only explain it for folk who have ridden it.
Yeah. I think the important thing for the
Mm,
podcast, because lots of people might not have ridden an e-bike, is to know it's there, and then just to play with it and feel it. I think for me the thing that,
yeah,
so I almost think of the power modes of the
yeah,
motor as my front derailleur,
Yeah.
and then the rear derailleur is going through the gears. So you almost as you
Yeah.
go up through the modes, it's like you're going
I
to
know what you mean.
smaller rings at the front because it kind of makes it easier to pedal. If I don't know whether that's so, but yeah, you have to move the gears around at the back to just get you in the sweet spot, and you'll feel when you're not getting the assistance, you kind of go to a slightly bigger gear at the
Yeah.
back, a bigger cog at the back to give you a little,
Yeah.
higher gear, or the other way round. The other thing that's very noticeable is so it's 25 kilometers an hour,
Yes.
which is around about 16 or so miles an hour. When you get to that kind of level,
Yeah.
you almost it's almost like you hit a
Yes.
wall and then you have to push through the wall. And once you've passed it the other side,
Yeah.
it's just like riding
Yeah.
a normal mountain bike. But there's a kind of zone just before it. You almost get to the point where you're actually better off
Yes.
slowing down a little bit to
Yes.
maybe 15 miles an hour, and then you get the assistance
Yeah.
rather than trying to push a gear and go fast. So, but the thing I love about it is it's a bit like my love of driving is
Yeah.
because I love the mechanics of driving a car. I love why you change gear, when you
Yeah.
change gear, how you steer, all of those things. And what the e-bike's done is it's
Yeah.
given me a whole
Yes.
new bunch of bike mechanics to learn, a new
Yes.
technique
Yes.
to learn, and it's ace. Because when you get it right and you hit a climb and you're in the right mode and the right
It
gear
is. It
and
is.
you get into that
In
power
fact, do
band,
you
it's
know?
mega.
I've just thought of. Have you Did you drive like an '80s turbocharged car?
Yeah, where nothing happens. It's like nothing, 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 everything.
Everything. That's probably the best way of describing this power band. So
Yeah.
if you drive a, I'm going to use an Escort RS Turbo.
Oh yeah, or Fiesta RS Turbo, they're
Oh,
even worse.
exactly. So 1.6 litre CVH engine with a big turbo bolted onto it. And if you were on the motorway and you were driving at 70 mile an hour on the motorway in fifth gear and you stuck your toe down, nothing would happen. It would
Yeah,
start just gathering speed. Okay, it wouldn't surge forward. It would just start gathering speed, but you'd feel that the drive system was kind of laboured as you were trying to gather
yeah,
speed. If you drop it down into fourth or into third, and it just got into that power band, you'd feel it surge forward, and
yeah,
that is, I think, what we're trying to describe
yeah,
is
yeah,
that
yeah,
if you ride an e-bike in too high a gear, even if you're under the restricted speed, so you're riding at 13 mile an hour, but if you're in too high a gear and the revs of the motor isn't in this sweet spot, it feels as though the bike just is gathering speed. If you go up a few gears into a lower gear, you'll feel the motor feel more urgent and more alive.
yeah.
Is that fair?
Yeah, yeah, no, it's absolutely right, and I think I'd almost go to the point where you could be forgiven for thinking if you when you ride a bike, if you're in the wrong gear, you think, hold on, I'm not getting much assistance here at all.
Yeah.
And
Yes.
and it goes back to the point at the beginning. You think e-bikes are cheating. Well, let me tell you now, if you don't get this technique right,
Yeah.
you won't get the assistance you think you're going to get. It's not like you're in a moped; you just open the throttle and off you
Yeah.
go. You've got to. There's a real knack to it,
Yes.
and when you get that knack, they're amazing. And
Yes.
so that for me is again just another thing to enjoy about the bike. And
Yeah.
one of the things I would say is you were talking about the torque going through the chain and the cassette. Is when you are in the higher assistance modes like Tour and like Turbo, if you change gear in those modes when you're moving the pedals
Yeah.
around, it makes a right clonk
Yes.
and he suddenly realised just how much torque's going through the chain.
Yes. Massive.
It's actually a bit unnerving, to be honest. It's like, oh, that didn't seem nice. So yeah, mate, I'm just like the biggest e-bike fan ever now. And then the last thing to mention before we go on to just a quick chat about modifications
Mm.
and so on is, and I didn't really get to do this the first couple of times out because it was very, very wet and very slippy, is I had a really long, fast descent on my last ride on the bike.
Yeah.
And oh boy, they're good at going downhill. Oh, because I think because I'd been it's in fact it's Chalk Pit Lane. It's the on the video tonight. It was the lane that I rode up at the beginning of my riding part of the video.
Right.
Well, if you ride down it, it's wicked, but it's very sketchy. But the bike's got such a low center of gravity. It's got such incredible suspension. The tires, because now I'm running tubeless. This isn't just little things. So I'm running tubeless at 30 psi.
Yeah.
On my full suspension mountain bike, I'm running tubed tires, but would normally be running maybe 40 to 45 psi. The difference is unbelievable.
Yes. Yeah. And you can,
So,
and in the wet weather, you can, because they're 2.6-inch tyres. And this is the other thing that you've got to remember is it's the tyre volume as well. So on your e-bike, because it's a relatively old bike now in today's terms.
yeah.
Lovely bike, but a relatively old bike. It's got a relatively narrow rim. In fact, actually, probably your gravel wheels have probably got as wide a rim as your mountain bike. So
Wow.
yeah. So what you've got to bear in mind is that you'll be on probably a 2 to 2.2 inch tire on your 2.2s on your non e-bike, and with a relatively narrow rim. So you have to run quite a high pressure because of the volume of the tire, and because you're tubed, you want to try and not get pinch flats. Whereas on the e-bike, your new carbon wheels are 30 millimeters. So they're probably a good centimetre wider with a 2.6-inch, 29-inch tyre fitted to it with no tube. So you never have to now think about pinch flats because there's nothing to pinch. There's no tube. The rim is basically locked your tyre onto its bead. So you can really start playing with tyre pressures. So I think we spoke last week, I think it was, that chalk in general is incredibly slippy, similar to sort of Lakeland slate almost, which is the closest I've...
Or basically Vaseline covered PTFE.
That as well. And so realistically, you could probably drop down to mid-20s on a particularly wet day on your bike and not have to worry about the tyre coming off the rim, not worry about puncturing or anything like that, and releasing even more grip to what you're used to.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay, I might give that a go,
do.
actually.
Absolutely.
Yeah, no, I just can't wait to get out and ride it again, to be honest. So yeah, and I've got my one of the neighbor in the farm next door. He's got an e-bike, so he nearly came out with me last weekend, but in the end couldn't. And then my next door neighbor Will, I'm very much trying to get him to buy one, so expect a call. So we can have a few people to go out on e-bikes, because the challenge you've got on an e-bike, and I now get it, is if you don't have anybody you know who's got one, it's very difficult to go out with people who aren't on e-bikes, unless you just prepare to wait for them a lot, because you cover the ground so quickly.
Well, I would definitely say that on the road. On the mountain bike, do watch the video that I've put on the Criterium Cycles YouTube channel, which
I'll put a link above there right now.
Yeah. Do watch that video, because I went out with Rosie and with Steve, and the first probably 2 to 3 minutes is basically Rosie and me in the van just explaining the backstory of why we did this video in the first place, to set the context of, is it possible to ride with somebody on a non-e-bike if you've got an e-bike? Watch it, and then you can put that in the comments as well. But on a mountain bike, it's much easier. On a road bike, it is harder.
Yeah. So there you go. It's been a while coming, but I finally had me ride on the rail.
Yes.
Love the dropper seat post as well, by the
Yes.
way. It's
Yeah.
ace. The other things we put, obviously, the electronic shifting
Yeah.
is mega.
Yeah.
It's absolutely perfect
Yeah.
every time.
Well, we're going to come on to
There's no
that.
rubber or anything.
Stop. We're going to come on to that
It's all
with
right.
modifications in a second. One thing I'd just like
Okay.
to cover off really quickly,
Yeah.
because this is the thing that we get in the shop all the time: range.
Yep. Interesting. Okay, so I've got is it 650
Right.
kilowatt
So
hour?
you've got Tracy in her Powerfly
Yeah,
FS4 Sport. Sorry,
yeah,
Powerfly Sport 4 has got a 500 watt hour battery. And just for folk who go, I have no idea what you're talking about, think of the battery and the number as the size of the fuel tank. So, for example, a Fiesta might have a 35 litre fuel tank, whilst a Range Rover's got an 85 litre fuel tank because it's bigger and heavier
yeah,
and more gas guzzling engine. It's the same on
yeah,
bikes. So a commuter bike may have a 3 or a 400 watt hour battery. A longer distance commuter bike or mountain bike might have a 500 watt hour battery. And up until very recently, the biggest watt hour battery for Bosch was 625 watt hour, which is what Pete and I and Rosie have in our Trek rails. Now,
yeah.
the bigger the number, the bigger the fuel tank. That's all you have to concern yourself with. Um,
Yes.
Trek, yeah,
Or here's the
yes,
thing. So the motor
yeah,
produces 250
yeah,
watts, and therefore, if you have a 500 watt hour
yeah,
battery, that would allow you to run on absolutely full beans
yeah,
power for 2
yes,
hours
yeah,
because you've got 250 watts and you've got 500 watts of
yes,
power in the
correct. Yeah.
battery.
So the motor
So
consumption at full power is 250 watts, and there is
yeah,
500 watt hours to support that 250 watts. So, as Pete said,
yeah,
at maximum output, which you are rarely at, always remember that you
yes,
are you
yeah,
are fractions of your ride at 250 watts of motor power. Yeah,
exactly,
yeah.
exactly. So
Sorry,
the
sorry,
so
Pete.
it was
One
obviously
final thing, just for the comments.
yeah,
Bosch have recently launched their new system, which has got for 2022 has got a 750 watt hour battery. Okay,
wow,
that's on the new 2022 models, and only the new Trek Rail 9.8 and 9.9 models feature that system, and they've
wow,
restricted the sizing of it as well. So if you need a small frame size, that 750 watt hour battery doesn't fit, so you can only get from a medium frame size and upwards. And this is why I thought it was
okay,
so important to have this chat about range, because for Pete is 6'5", yeah,
no 6 foot 3,
6'3",
yeah,
and you know 80, 90 kilos. I'm 5'10" and currently
I love that so much.
95 kilos,
Yeah,
and we both have a 625 watt hour battery in our Trek rails. Pete, let's talk
yeah.
range, and do we need any more?
Right. So I've just opened up Strava to give you the proper numbers. So the first time I rode my bike out, it was the battery was fully
Yeah,
charged, and I did 13.5 miles with 1,600 feet
yeah,
of climbing. Okay, so I was riding for just
yeah,
over an hour. Okay. I then didn't charge the
yeah,
battery. Okay. And I went out the next weekend and I did 21.4 miles with 2,600 feet
Yeah.
of climbing. And I was out for an hour and 50
Yeah.
minutes. And I came back and I had one of the little blob
Yeah.
indicators left.
So you have 5 blobs. So when you own an e-bike, we live life in blobs. So so you start with 5 blobs, and how many blobs have you got at the end?
So basically, that is a total of 30, 35
Yeah.
miles, pretty much, and about 3
Yeah.
hours of riding. And if I'd have done that all in one
Yeah.
go, and the other thing about that was, it's a bit like when you test drive an
Yeah.
electric car. It was new, so I was in turbo a lot.
Yeah. 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 You'll have probably been incredibly inefficient on that first ride.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So then the next ride I went. So I then charged the bike. So the last ride I went out, I used 2
Yeah.
blobs, and I did 23 miles in 2 hours.
Okay. And what was the
And
climbing in
that's
that?
with 2,500 feet of
Okay.
climbing.
So just remind me, how does the third ride compare to the second ride in terms of sort of distance and climbing?
Climbing is the
Right.
same. Distance is the same,
Okay.
pretty much. It's about a
Well,
mile, I
that's
think.
interesting. So you use 2 blobs in your third ride,
Yeah,
and I would imagine, yeah,
3.
and 3 blobs affect. Well, you use 4
Yeah,
blobs in your cumulative first and second ride, which actually shows just how inefficient you were riding that first ride. I mean, that was just foot to the floor,
I'm like, Dave,
turbo. Yeah,
turbo.
yeah, right,
Wah!
okay. So ultimately, let's discard the first ride as a sort of, you know, Pete's. Yeah,
Play.
absolutely. Yeah, Pete doing launch control and all that sort of fodder. So the third ride is the real key one. So that is the novelty of
Yeah,
owning an e-bike has now worn off. Let's just go and use this as my new bike that I've fallen in love with.
yeah.
So that is 20, how many miles? 23
23 miles
miles, 2,500 feet of climbing, and you've
Yeah,
used 2 blobs
and yeah,
in
and
2
2
hours.
hours. And just to add to that, by the way, it was an incredibly
Right.
windy day, to the point where I was riding along a ridge line and I was probably at an angle of 25 degrees into the
Wow.
wind just to
Yeah.
stay on the
Yeah.
bike. So when that was a
Yeah.
headwind, you kind of had to stick an assistance mode up a bit just just to, I wouldn't that was another I would not have gone out on my bike had I not been on an e-bike that day, because it was so
Wow.
windy. It was
Yeah.
awful. I mean, I woke up in the morning, Trace, went, not going out on your bike, and I'm like, oh, I need to get
Yeah.
out some exercise. So that was another reason for me
Yeah.
going out on the
Yeah.
bike.
So that would have been a day that you wouldn't have actually gone out and ridden your bike.
No,
Yeah.
no, no, no. And I did go out and ride my bike, and as a consequence, bear with me, I did 1,200 calories.
Okay. There you go.
So you know
Yeah.
there you go. So yeah, no, it's. I think the range thing, we've talked about it being a self-fulfilling prophecy quite a lot, but
Yeah.
it really is. You know, the fitter you get, the you know, and the other thing about those rides is I purposely went just up every
Yes.
hill I could find. Whereas normally on a mountain bike, you try and avoid them a little bit. You like going down them, but
Yeah.
not up them so much. So yeah, no, range is not an issue. And the other thing is, I'm 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 riding a little bit more at the moment, so I'm getting more bike fit in terms of not my legs bike fit, but just my body's being sat on a bike, my
Yeah.
arse not hurting after
Yeah.
half an hour, you know, those types of things. So
Very
yeah,
good. Yeah.
it was good.
Very good.
It was really good.
Right. No, I
Yeah.
think that was really important to cover, which is basically if you've got a bike that's got a 5 to 625 watt hour battery, for most of what most people do in terms of the time that they've got, I only have 2 to 3 hours to
Yeah.
spend. That
Yeah.
size of battery on that capacity of motor off-road is fine. So don't worry, people.
Yeah. What I
Yeah,
would say, just as a tip, is as I said, I went out the first time, came back, and went, "Oh, I'm not even used half the battery yet. I won't
yeah,
bother charging it up. I'll be fine the next time." The next ride, I did have a little bit of range anxiety because I'm still getting used to the bike and understanding it. I was thinking, am I going to have enough to get back? So my tip would be, if you've kind of been out for a ride, use 2 or 3 blobs. Just put the
that's a
bike
really,
on charge so it's
really
full
fair
the
point.
next time, and
Really
then you
fair
don't worry
point.
about it.
Yeah, well done. Right, now, you bought your e-bike. You're really content. You're really happy. How can you spend more money at the bike shop? That's what we're moving on
Yes,
to.
yes, yes. But I think we'll cover that in more detail next week. Yes, we've been chatting for nearly an
Oh,
hour
really?
already. Yeah. But I honestly, I think we should tee up next week because it's such an important subject for me. I think it deserves a
Great.
podcast of its own because we haven't really talked about it. And what we kind of have a little bit. When we did the wheels podcast, we talked about why you
Yeah,
change the wheels and so on. But ultimately, when you buy a bike, and when we bought the rails, and actually we can kind of talk a bit more about what you're doing and what I'm doing, and we don't want to give too much away because we've got next year. The big plan next year is to do stuff so we cycle
yeah,
together and we can compare and
yeah.
contrast side by side. Because you're changing things like
Oh, yeah.
forks and
They've
stuff.
arrived.
Yeah, and yeah, well, the I shouldn't say this. I know what the next
Brakes.
upgrade's going to be.
Oh,
No,
okay.
brakes are fine.
Really?
Forks.
Let's do this
Yeah.
next week. Let's do. In fact,
Because
actually,
yeah,
next
yeah.
week, let's talk.
Next week's the Christmas. Next week is the Christmas special, so
Right.
we've got plenty
Next
of
week's
time.
Christmas special. So next week, what we're going to talk is upgrades and modifications per bike category. So if you have a commuter bike, what do you want to put on it? If you have a
Yeah,
mountain bike, what's your best upgrades to go on? And if you've got a road bike, what's your
yeah,
best upgrades to go on? Let's go
yeah,
commuter
yeah. I agree.
bike, mountain bike, road bike, upgrades. That's next week's
I
podcast.
agree. That's a cunning plan, my friend. Cunning plan.
This is the reason why Cycle Sunday podcast is in the top level of podcasts, because we think it's the agility, people. It's the fact that we're thinking on our feet. We're making this up as we go.
We just think, shut up.
You love it. We love it. What more do you want?
I know. But on that bombshell, as we rapidly approach our deadline that
Yeah.
we give ourselves, and as it's Friday evening and our wives are waiting in another room for us both to finish doing the Cycle Sunday podcast, it's like, come on, it's the end of the week now. We want to
Yes.
start the weekend, please. Thank you. But yes, no, I love my rail, and I can't recommend e-bikes highly enough. And let me finish on this one thing. I understand, and this is probably the biggest challenge for a lot of people with e-bikes, is they are
Yeah.
expensive things. And I guess maybe I'm opening up a can of worms here. My gut feel says, and I'm pretty sure you'll back me up on this one, is that it might be very tempting to go out and buy a
Mm-hmm.
budget e-bike. And my gut feel says that's even more of a bad idea than buying a normal budget bike, because there's just, you can feel how much work they're doing and how they're heavier, the suspension needs to work better, the wheels need to work better, the motor needs to be better, the drivetrain needs to be better. And my gut feel says if you buy a cheap e-bike, you're just going to end up with a lot of repair bills and it's going to go wrong a lot. So yes, they're expensive things, but if you can afford to invest in a good quality manufacturer, I would recommend.
Do you know what? I'm really glad you said that and not me, because people, when they hear my voice, they will automatically think He works for Criterium Cycles. He's just trying to sell product. You have said that totally spontaneously as a consumer,
Yep.
right?
Yep.
So with what I'm about to say, please bear in mind that I'm answering a consumer's question, which is Peter's question.
Yep.
And that is the problem with the bike industry is there is a very, very small barrier to entry. So any company can relatively inexpensively take a cheap motor and drivetrain system, a cheap frame system, put it all together, have it sprayed in their colours and put their logo on, and put it onto the market. Whereas in the car
Yep.
industry, the reason why it doesn't matter really whether you buy a Kia or a Hyundai or a BMW or a Rolls Royce, you're always going to get a good product. And the reason being is the barrier to entry is massive because you need a factory to produce them. You need a NCAP rating. They need to be type approved for various countries. The cost of getting your product to market actually makes it difficult for car manufacturers to exist in the first place, which is why you have so many conglomerates now.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, how many people know that Fiat and Citroën and Peugeot and Renault, pretty much the same company, right? And
Oh,
yeah, yeah,
the Stellantis. Yeah.
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 And the
The
reason being
the
is,
yeah.
as individual companies, they couldn't afford to really be in the motor space. Whereas with bikes, it's very different. So, to back Peter up on what he says, yes, you can absolutely get cheap e bikes. You can get cheap bikes. So, forget e bikes or non e bikes. You can buy cheap bikes and you can buy expensive bikes. And for those folk in the comments who say, oh, for this amount of money, that's a ridiculous amount of price, what are you comparing it to? Genuinely, what you're comparing it to? What you have to look at is that your big bicycle manufacturers who have been doing this for many, many years, and the what I would call the automotive big three is BMW, Mercedes, and Audi. Yeah, they are the premium quality mass manufactured manufacturers. In
Mhm.
that space in the bike world, you have Giant, Specialized, and Trek. All American manufacturers, and the Americans are effectively the Germans of the bicycle world. And if you buy any
Yeah.
bike from any of those companies, we are Trek, okay, and because we believe that there's no point, you know, we'll never badmouth any of the other manufacturers. I think it's really bad practice to do so. But similarly, there is no point selling a Trek, a Giant, and a Specialized from my perspective, because it's like somebody walking in and saying, I need a medium sized vehicle to take, you know, my wife, me, two kids, and my Labrador in the back. What do we need? And I've got £30,000 to spend. Brilliant. You need a 3 Series Touring. Great, because I'm in the BMW shop at the moment. And then somebody turns around and says, oh, that's great, excellent, I'll have one of those. But before you make that final decision, can I show you this C-Class estate and this Audi A4 Avant? Well, why? Well, because they're similarly built, they're similarly priced, and they're similarly spec'd, but I just want to give you the choice of three. Well, now I'm confused. So that's why we, as a company, as Criterium Cycles, we've chosen basically to be with Trek, not because it's better than Specialized or Giant and Specialized are better than Trek, but we love their backup, we love
Yeah.
their customer service, we love their engineering, and we know that when we sell you a bike, you're going to get a good quality bike. But don't forget, Trek have been doing this since 1976. They've got a massive dealer range across the world to give you a brilliant backup service. And you've got to consider when you're buying an e-bike that it's like buying a car. You need backup service, you need dealer support. And that is why don't buy a cheap product.
Yeah.
Hope that helps.
What a good place to end the podcast. Ce
Yes.
soir. Guys, I hope you enjoyed that. Put it in the comments what you add your comments to that debate, because as I said, it's been a fascinating start to my e-bike journey for sure.
Yes.
But for now, it comes that time where we're going to close things down here, and I'm going to say I've been Pete Greaves.
And I've been Paul Bowker.
You ride safe, guys.
Ride safe, everybody.